Well, I'm just happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Levine, and for your team. I guess I'm part of that team, too. This is a remarkable event, and I'm grateful to be here. And you can thank Jenny Kong and Joyce Fenstermaker for all the lovely arrangements for food and so forth. Welcome to Winston-Salem from wherever you come. If I have met you in bed, so to speak, please come up to me and introduce yourself again. People look very different when they're going through HIPEC. You remember? Yeah. Absolutely. You've been sitting for a long time. Could you please stand up and get your rear end, just a minute, maybe stretch a second here. You've been very attentive and kind to be attentive. No one's fallen asleep as far as I can tell. You can give your partner a hug if you're like Beth Henderson right here, a 15-year survivor from Wake Forest. Just do a little stretching so you can get your mind back alive. And you can sit when you're ready. Or if you don't want to, you stand up. If you need to take care of a biological need, you're welcome to do that. I won't be offended at all. Now, your second task is this. I want you to look around the room and pay attention to the people that you're looking at. There's more courage packed into this room than any place in North Carolina right now, probably in the country. Courage begot by suffering. You know what suffering is. And I'll say a little bit about that from a clinical standpoint in just a minute. I am a psychologist by training, and I'm also been well trained by you. And much of what you hear from me will be echoes of your voices about what it's like to go through cytoreductive surgery plus HIPEC. Now, one more task. I want you to take your right hand and reach to the person on your right, or if you're on the end, you have to switch around, and just pat them on the back. Just pat them on the back. Use your creative sense about patting somebody on the back because you have come through a remarkable time. These topics cannot be spoken about in a half an hour, but I'm going to try to pick up the speed here. We're a little off schedule, and we need to get you to lunch pretty soon. I'm going to talk about post-traumatic stress, not post-traumatic stress disorder, because most of you don't have that. Some people might. Quality of life, Ed's made some excellent reference to that. This won't be a data presentation. It'll be primarily, hopefully, educational, maybe inspirational. And finally, coping. And the coping piece of this will be primarily what you've taught me and your colleagues have taught me over the years. These are the objectives. We'll define post-traumatic stress and differentiate it from PTSD. I feel like this side of the room has been discriminated against over here, so I'm going to walk over to this side of the room and talk to you all, because I can't see some of you over here. So we'll talk about PTSD, differentiate it from stress alone, define quality of life, and we won't have time to look at the data, but there's really interesting data that we've produced here and others have produced as well. By the way, just to make an aside here, I see a very smiling, good face in the back here, Kathleen Cummings, Perry now, who is responsible for much of the quality of life data. So please give her a hand right back here. And Dr. Levine, she deserves a raise for all the stuff that she does. Again, the methods of coping are going to come from you. So here we go. You recognize that? That's September 4th, Hurricane Dorian. Well, most of you who've been through HIPEC have experienced a hurricane-like experience, I would guess. That's September the 4th. Thank goodness it didn't rack Florida, but it sure did enough damage. You may recall from your experience here or elsewhere the days and the time when you were in bed and it felt like you had been raked over by a hurricane. So very quickly, 2 slides that speak to physiology and the body. What happens to the body in HIPEC? Well, look at this. Actually, this is any kind of major surgery. How many people here have been through major surgery in this room? So you get this at a visceral level. It's not just an academic exercise where your sympathetic nervous system is activated, your endocrine stress response is activated. You have pituitary hormone secretion, and on and on and on. By the way, if you would like a copy of these slides, we can get them to you. I'm going to, again, pick up the pace here. Essentially, your whole body responds to surgery in a really powerful way. Another slide that depicts what happens to your hormonal system with any kind of major surgery, any insult to the body. And the body's reaction is to say something like this: whoa, what is going on here? Why did you do this to me? You may be saying that to yourself, too. In fact, many people I've talked with say things like this. I talked to a person yesterday who said, I wish I hadn't done this. Did any of you ever have that notion? Some people say, I wish I'd never done this. 2 weeks later say, well, maybe I would do it. And usually over time, folks say, I'm glad I did this because it is a life-saving surgery. This is what you may feel like. This is one of our first patients. This is when Dr. Levine wasn't very experienced with his, he hadn't done 200 cases. This is the very first case, HIPEC here. It's a shock to the body, a shock to the system. And with regard to post-traumatic stress, it's my experience clinically, and we don't have the data on this with HIPEC patients, but in general, and breast cancer patients are the most frequently studied, post-traumatic stress disorder is not common, probably 15%, maybe less, but post-traumatic stress symptoms are common, and here's what they are. You may have experienced these. If you don't like public speaking, oftentimes people have these kind of experiences prior to coming up and doing a talk like this. This is a physiological reaction. These are the psychological reactions. So the body under CRS plus HIPEC is going through some of these things, as well as just a general blah. Did you ever have that feeling? Just blah. A patient once described this to me. She said, I'm just out of sorts, completely out of sorts. So with regard to the psychological, by the way, most of the literature on post-traumatic stress disorder comes from the military or a single traumatic event. CRS plus HIPEC, it is a single event, but often it has reverberations. It's kind of like an earthquake in one sense, and the quake hits, and then there can be after effects. There can be, not for everybody. And one of my standard lines now with folks I meet in the hospital is, you may just do fine over time, but you may have flashbacks in terms of dreams that come to you about what happened to you, particularly if you have an experience of delirium in the ICU. Anybody ever have that one? Not many people, thank goodness. So feeling afraid, nervous, by the way, avoidance is not a bad coping mechanism. We'll say more about that in just a minute. Bad dreams about the event you just experienced. Feel nervous in a situation that reminds you of unpleasant events. Had a talk to a person yesterday, said that somehow she's gotten more fearful of crowds, even coming out to something like this. It's just not easy for her to do. Now, post-traumatic stress symptoms usually subside in a few days. Maybe you can relate to that, particularly if you had intense pain and it went away. I tend to forget that, thank goodness. Now the disorder, the post-traumatic stress disorder, is a little more, not actually a lot more symptomatic in terms of nightmares, flashbacks, constantly thinking about it, avoidance of situations or people remind you of the event. How many people love to go to hospitals now? One person back here loves to go to hospital. I sometimes have a hard time coming into the office myself. Only negative thoughts or emotions, constantly feeling jittery or nervous on edge. This is a person who has a disorder that can be treated and tended to with professional care, or the simple technique of, as you'll hear a little later on today, is movement, exercising. What's the difference? Duration and intensity. And that's key, really. What interferes with your functioning? The ability to do what you normally do. Oftentimes, these surgeries that folks go through, there's an expectation. In fact, you may have heard this. You heard this from Dr. Levine, something like this. The average stay is around. Didn't you tell them, Ed, what the average stay is for crying out loud? The average stay is around 3 months. I've heard about you. I've heard about you. The average stay is around 7 or 8 days, right? Anybody spend longer than 7 or 8 days? Are you mad at him? So unmet expectations do tend to create anxiety and distress. And I'll show a slide in a little bit to suggest how you might deal with unmet expectations. All right, so what are some of the risk factors? History of depression, anxiety or other psychological stressors, life stressors, and this is, I'll never forget this, a patient telling me that her cancer was the least of her problems. Her worry was that she loved her son dearly, and he was divorcing from her daughter-in-law, whom she loved dearly. That was the most stressful thing in her life. It wasn't the upcoming extensive treatment for cancer. Minimal social support, geographical dislocation, financial pressures. You recognize any of those? Probably many of you experienced all of those. In fact, there was a time when the HIPEC, CRS plus HIPEC, was an experimental procedure. Anybody spend some time trying to talk to your insurance company about this? Yeah. You know we need healthcare reform, don't you? Okay. This may be one of the most stressful things you've heard, and I just thought Carolyn Lewandowski was mentioning that what her husband heard when he came into this HIPEC zone was, you've got 3 months, there's nothing more we can do. Anybody hear that one? There's nothing more we can do. That's a very discouraging statement, isn't it? There's nothing more we can do. That can be a traumatic statement. Or you have 3 months to live. Words matter. Words can hurt. Words can heal, too. So what kind of professional intervention might be useful? These aren't. Although I was with a group last night who was drinking, and some of them are on the speakers panel today. I won't name them, Carolyn. I won't name them. She likes rosé, by the way. If you want to reward her, a whole bottle of rosé. So these are probably not good ideas in excess. Moderation. Overly aggressive behavior may be a symptom, and you may need intervention like Mr. Curmudgeon. If you find yourself being Mr. or Mrs. Curmudgeonly all the time, it might help to talk with somebody. Be aware of crowds, reluctance to go to theaters, crowded places, easily angered, depressed, sad, and withdrawn. These are indications for potential professional intervention. Now, as Ed suggested earlier, most people do not say, I'm in therapy, I want to go see my therapist. We still have a stigma about that. Think about this, the double whammy. I've got cancer and I'm nuts, too. It's a hard thing. So we have a team of people. I'm one of 4 clinicians and a therapeutic harpist. And what we do is talk with people about managing the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. I'll give you the quick basic training. Everybody who comes into Cancerland contends with 3 areas. The first area is diagnosis and symptom management. The second area is relationship changes, family, professional, and others. And the third area, what goes on in your head and what goes on in your heart. Because what goes on in your head makes a difference. Like, I'm not going to live through this. I can't do this. I give up. Many people I talk with get into that kind of zone. That's a tough place to be. That's the quick basic training what we talk with our patients about. We also look at, of course, psychological diagnosable things like depression and anxiety, for sure. Whoops, I think I pressed them up. Very quickly, what do we mean by health-related quality of life? Simply speaking, this: the impact of an illness or treatment on the individual's physical, psychological, social, somatic functioning, and general well-being, and also in spiritual well-being. Many people that we talk with, everybody I talk with, I ask them about their support system. And many people, most people actually in our zone here in North Carolina, have a church community that's part of their support zone. So, and people have studied that dimension as well as spiritual dimension. These are the dimensions that we look at. And many of you have completed our questionnaires. How many of you have completed a quality of life questionnaire? Not everybody. What's the matter with the rest of you? Well, thank you for doing that. You are helping us hopefully make a difference for folks coming after you. coping. This is the question we have as well, is how do folks cope with these stressors, challenges? You gotta walk, you have to move, you gotta move. Have you heard that from your physical therapist when you're in the hospital here? A patient I talked to yesterday was saying, I don't want to feel like going anywhere. It's physical therapy. We have a great physical therapist. You have to move. We all have to move. It's critical for, particularly post-surgery. Self-talk, meditation, prayer. I can do this. A patient yesterday, one of her prayers was, Lord, be with me. Especially when she was in pain. Lord, be with me in this pain. Mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is nothing more than paying close attention to what you're doing and not being caught by the past or the future. Think about that, how complicated that is. Almost all of us are in the past or the future. Think about your thought patterns. Mindfulness practice, pay attention to what's going on right now. Like if your rear end is sore, you're paying attention to that, right? Or something I say triggers a thought you have, and you go somewhere else. You literally go somewhere else. You are blessed with a wonderful imagination. It can take you places. When Dr. Levine was talking about his boring studies up here, you could be elsewhere, right? You could be completely out of this building. In fact, I was noticing several people gone. Nutrition, you're going to hear a spectacular nutritionist talk with you later today. Strengthen your resilience. How do you do that? It's really simple. You walk, you practice mindfulness, and you cultivate optimism. Those are the three elements to resilience. You know what that is already because most of you have come through a procedure, either as a caregiver or as a patient, where you've had to develop resilience post-treatment, or perhaps prior to treatment. So these are some coping methods, and the kind of things that we do, usually short-term. For example, patient feels like, I regret doing this. I would never do this again. That could be a short-term issue to help resolve. What does regret do to somebody? Have you ever regretted anything? It really gets you stuck. It keeps you stuck. So sometimes getting unstuck might be facilitated by a therapist, counselor type. Time is a great healer too. Isn't time the best healer? I mean, sometimes you can outweigh things. And finally, probably most importantly, if you're really lucky, you have somebody who loves you. And you also love somebody else. Powerful healing force. And I was at the bedside of a person yesterday, surrounded by two guardian angels. You could feel the love in the room surrounding this patient who was suffering badly, but also encouraged. And as the time we spent together went on, over about 20, 30 minutes, you could feel the energy in the room as these loving caregivers were giving her what she needed. Okay, now I'm going to launch into, here's what patients have told me literally about how they cope and how they manage. This is a patient who had a lot of episodes of MRIs. Ever had an MRI, anybody? CT scan? Well, she couldn't wear her little jewelry going through the MRI, so she put this tattoo, Dare to Live. In 2012, she was diagnosed with metastatic disease and didn't think she was making it. Now, 2019, she came to me, she referred to me, because her medical oncologist was worried about her psychological status. What she said was, I don't think I'm going to see my daughters graduate from high school. Now they graduate from college. Blessed are the flexible, that they shall never be bent out of shape. This is actually Dr. Levine. You probably recognize part of him there. It's not Dr. Vatanopoulos or Dr. Shin or other two wonderful surgeons. You got to have a plan B. Your plan A is this, but you got to have a plan B. If you're stuck on plan A, you will be stuck. You cannot be Mr. This is Mr. Grumpy. My grandson, some years ago, he wasn't too happy that day. Rather than Mr. Grumpy, shouldn't you be Mr. Helpful? Now, wouldn't it be nice if it were just easy to say, I'm not going to be grumpy today. I'm going to be Mr. Helpful, Mr. Happy today. Well, you know something? You can do that with limitations, with some limits. We don't power our entire being by mind, matter. There are others in the surround. In fact, you people raise my mood by seeing you and being with you today. You are the catalyst for my mood to believe that human beings can heal and also can be inspiring and inspired. It takes courage to come in here. Is anybody here without a partner? Anybody here alone? Come in, so good for you. Good for you. It's not easy to come to these things alone. Okay, so be Mr. Helpful. And in fact, it does. If you're feeling down, sometimes it helps me to say, well, I'm going to go do something with somebody else. And for me, I'm really lucky because I work in a system where I'm always continually having opportunities to do that. Practice gratitude. At the end of the day, find 5 things that you're grateful for and remind yourself of those. Everyone can do that every day. Now, here's a patient of mine who said, fight cancer. I know that some of you have minds that went elsewhere. I just want to point out one person in a red shirt in the second row. Laugh the hardest, the quickest. Fight cancer. This is a caregiver. Her mother, in her 70s, was in the waiting area, so I saw this. I thought, that's pretty cool. So we talked a little bit. We went out and talked to her mother. Fight cancer. Look at this. My lifeguard walks on water. She wasn't talking about your surgeon, Dr. Levine. Right? He does think he walks on water. Right? Very spiritual person. And these t-shirts are great, by the way. There are a couple of them here. Up here we have Finding a Cure for Appendix Cancer, Priceless.
She made.
You made them. And you have what's your t-shirt say? Team James.
Fight like a superhero.
Oh, awesome. Like James Worthy? No. That's North Carolina here. So these t-shirts are really neat, and patients have taught me this too. Here's one of my patients who, these get a lot of interest. So when my patient comes in wearing this t-shirt, everybody talks to her. It's kind of neat to see her, because that is her way of gathering support around her. One of our volunteers some years ago, healing conversation, talking often helps. Depends on who you're talking to, too. It helps to talk with someone who listens. Listening is in short supply these days. You don't see models of this anywhere. What you see models of people talking over each other often on TV. So if you find someone who will listen to your heart, you found a precious person. And if you're really lucky, that person lives with you. But don't blame them if they can't. Because not everybody's equipped in the same way. Particularly about the private experience of life-threatening illness and life-threatening surgery. Often there's a piece of that is a private experience and nobody but you can get to. And that can be lonely, for sure. Now, if you're really, really lucky, you will have somebody who wraps their arms around you as if their life depended on it. Their life depended on it. And this is a family where that is the case. This is Carly, Kevin, Owen, and Maddox. What a story they have. And like Ed was saying earlier, these folks gave me permission to show their picture, appendiceal cancer survivor of about 5 years now. You'll see her this next month. If you have somebody who can put their arms around you and love you, you're very lucky. Laugh a lot, love a lot, live a lot. That's the formula for coping, for sure. You have to find your own path, of course. And there may be many, many ways that you can do this. Not only what you've seen here, wearing t-shirts and using inspiration, self-talk, professional counseling, getting away from things. Often trips make a huge difference. Just leaving the scene makes a huge difference. You find your method, your way. Self-knowledge, how do I work? Ask yourself, how do you work for coping to manage what might be called post-traumatic stress? Probably the post-trauma part that has left many of you. I hope it has anyway. Now today, I'm going to give you a prescription for good health. The prescription is this. Find somebody, and if you can, listen to their story, maybe tell yours. If you do that, it's my belief if you listen to a story with your heart, you spark grace in the world. Grace is a powerful healing force. It comes in the form of empathic engagement. listening carefully to what people say. Now, also laugh with people today. You have some great models for that. This gentleman up here, fight cancer, red shirt, talk to him. He's got a great sense of humor, right? I won't name his name because I don't know it. Thank you for your attention. I know we're over time. Thank you.